Hi, everybody. We are the Carlson Ventures Enterprise team presenting on the opportunity analysis of modular and solar assembly in North Minneapolis. This was a project conducted for the Northside Job Creation team in Minneapolis. What we're talking about on our presentation today, once we go through the introductions of our team, is our research process, conclusions on the modular component, and then the majority of the presentation will be on the solar industry. We'll wrap up with some conclusions and give the opportunity for viewers of this presentation to contact us with further questions. So to introduce ourselves, my name is Leah Batten. I am a first-year full-time MBA student at the Carlson School. Prior to coming to Carlson, I was working in commercial real estate on the brokerage and tenant advisory side, as well as in affordable housing development. And prior to that, I was working in education as a middle and high school math teacher. Here at Carlson, my focus is on social impact, innovation, and strategy.
Hey everyone, my name is Kate Ingersoll. I'm a Master's of Public Policy MBA dual degree at the U of M. Prior to being a grad student, I worked in operations and technology roles in the nonprofit sector. And with my time at Humphrey and Carlson, I'm going to be studying organizational development and nonprofit capacity building.
Hi, I'm Will Kaiser, and prior to starting my MBA at Carlson, I worked in economic development, logistics, and airport-related projects. And my focus at Carlson is B2B marketing and corporate strategy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cam McNamara. I'm an undergrad student at Carlson. I have a small business ownership background, and I am currently studying entrepreneurship and strategic management.
Thanks, Cam. To remind everybody about our research process this semester, we focus primarily on both primary research through the interview process and secondary research through industry reports. So these bucketed out to modular and solar, as well as looking into real estate and land use. And you can see we had a pretty extensive and busy semester. Our outreach included folks at various levels of government and public and private sector in the solar space and the real estate space. To give a high-level overview of the research on modular housing assembly, our team was continuing the work and research of another Carlson Ventures Enterprise team that worked in the fall of 2019. Their focus was on the initial viability of modular housing assembly. And their research findings were that modular housing assembly could present an opportunity for 25 to 100 living wage jobs that would also present opportunities for professional growth and new business development. They focused on 3 markets, which were accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, bridge component manufacturing, and then the commercial and multifamily space. So they noted that success of modular assembly would really be contingent on finding the right entrepreneur and the right market. Our findings as of March 2020 to continue that work, our team was asked to identify the demand for affordable modular multifamily housing in the Twin Cities. And we were able to identify the multifamily forecast and that there are about 7,000 units of unmet need here in the Twin Cities. And that's approximately a 2-to-1 central to suburban county demand. In terms of affordability, there is a pressing need and a focus at the state level. The Met Council data and projections show that about 57% of households are earning less than 75% of area median income. So they're earning less than $75,000 a year. Minnesota Housing at the state level is prioritizing affordability for households earning 50% AMI or $50,000 or less. So there's a big need and unmet demand for affordable housing. Looking at the industry climate, we see that attitudes are really mixed. Nobody's really wanting to take on the first mover risk, and everybody's kind of holding their breaths to see that somebody does. And it's brought up a lot of questions of, would modular housing assembly fragment, say, the contract process for builders, that in a way that might disincentivize them to take on potentially smaller contracts. And then the other piece we looked at was we were asked to see if offsite storage was a viable option to split the assembly plant and storage of these modular units. And the fact of the matter is that it would create overhead costs that are pretty prohibitive and create some logistical concerns that would really make this process and this job opportunity difficult. So the final thing we were asked was to look at what conditions would have to be in place for modular assembly to work in North Minneapolis. And as I mentioned, because builders might be disincentivized by smaller contracts, there would need to be a lot of work to gain buy-in, and this would likely come through also gaining union support. Developers, somebody needs to take the risk and dive in. They also need to be willing to solidify their plans and specs so that there isn't a reliance on contingencies and change orders later in the development process, because these units fit together very precisely and they need to be kind of locked in and ready to go from the start. And then the last change in those industry dynamics would be getting funders to prepare and support a funding structure that is different from, say, construction draws and a more spread out funding structure. There's also a large policy and regulation component that is needed to possibly make modular assembly work, and that includes getting consensus around what inspections look like both at plants and on sites. It also includes fast tracking those land entitlement and permitting processes, because in order for modular assembly to meet its efficiency potential and its cost savings potential, that regulatory piece needs to be really, really tight and really prompt. And then the other piece that we looked at in order to make modular assembly work was site requirements and site selection. So our findings indicate that a site would need to have at least 50 acres, and this would include a 150,000 square foot built to suit building, because the construction and storage of these modular units present unique space requirements for building. And as a part of that 50 acres, 12 to 15 of those acres would need to be allocated for storage. Another component of this are infrastructure and transportation requirements, because these are large units. They would require specific road designations, road widths, as well as the permitting and logistics required for oversized load transport. So our big finding with this is that the assembly of these modular units and the storage of them really need to co-locate and have a shared location in order for modular assembly to work. Next, we're going to shift to our findings on the solar industry, and I will turn it over to Kate.
Yes, thanks, Leah. I am going to kick us off with our analysis of the potential for solar panel manufacturing to create living wage jobs for people in North Minneapolis. If I could leave everyone who sees this recording with one takeaway, it's simply that the solar industry is exponentially growing. And with that growth, it is going to create a lot of new jobs in the state of Minnesota. So the real question on the table, and the question we're going to try to dig into in this presentation, is how do we ensure that the jobs created create opportunities for people living in North Minneapolis? So to kick us off, let me talk about the big picture of the solar industry. This is an industry, like I said, it's growing exponentially and is projected to continue to do so over the next decade. In the next 5 years, the number of solar panels installed in the United States is going to double. And even here, just looking at the state of Minnesota, Xcel Energy has committed to expand its solar portfolio by a magnitude of 4 times within the next decade. There are 2 major factors that are driving this really aggressive growth. The first, we can't ignore the role that the government is playing in incentivizing solar installation, both on the residential level and on like the high utility scale level. If I could call out a single federal incentive that has been very important in this growth, it is the Solar Installation Tax Credit, which started in 2019 and is going to go through 2024. This is a dollar-for-dollar tax credit on new solar installations that is available both to residential homeowners installing rooftop panels and major utilities doing megawatt, gigawatt style large solar plants. That has been a major driver of growth. Other significant drivers of growth have been state and utility incentives. So on the regional utility side, for residential installs, the utility will buy back the excess electricity generated from those rooftop panels. And that's called the net metering rate. So more attractive net metering rates create greater financial incentive. So this combination of federal, state, and utility incentives are all subsidizing that high upfront cost of solar and enabling customers who have a preference for renewable energy to invest. That's only one part of this puzzle here, though. The second major thing that's driving this growth is that the cost of manufacturing of solar panels has just really drastically dropped. A combination of improvements in the manufacturing technology, the fact that the components of solar panels are inexpensive and readily available, and manufacturers taking advantage of economies of scale have all driven down the price of the panels to the point at which they're essentially being sold as a global commodity. This is very good for consumers because it makes the panels more affordable. But the takeaway for manufacturing is that this is a space with high competition in manufacturing, where most of the money is made by operating at very large scale and low margins. And most of the manufacturing is done globally where labor is very inexpensive. So all of that together, we anticipate growth in solar installations to continue, even with the impact of COVID-19 on the market. We have seen that COVID-19 has had significant impact in the short term on demand. It's affected the supply chain, it's caused supply chain disruptions, and consumers are holding off on large investments right now. But all of these long-term market trends that are driving the growth of solar are expected to continue. And solar's place in the overall energy market is not expected to change as the result of that. So with that brief overview, I'd now like to turn things over to Cam, who's going to talk about solar manufacturing in the United States specifically.
Thanks, Kate. So for competition, we really want to ask ourselves 2 key questions: who's competing and how do they compete? So if we take a look at the first slide here, There are 24 solar manufacturing plants currently operating in the United States. The key takeaway from this slide is that about 60% of all US production comes from the three largest production plants, which are First Solar in Ohio, Tesla's Gigafactory, which is in Buffalo, New York, and then Hanwha's plant in Georgia. The supply chain for solar panel manufacturing is largely overseas. It can be seen as a 5-step process. So you'll have silicon, which is mined, turned into wafers. Wafers are compiled and make up cells, and then the cells are assembled into modules, which then can be installed as part of a system. So surprisingly, up to 73% of modules are still brought over from China, and 79% of cells. So how, you might be asking, how do these US manufacturers, if they have such high capacity, how are they competing? Well, they're actually importing the modules and sometimes the cells from China. So digging more into that, yeah, economies of scale is the largest factor that is contributing to US panel manufacturers' success. The reason that they're so big, like for example, the Gigawatt Factory and Hanwha's plant, is because they really have to keep up with the demand from local utilities. So primarily, the demand for solar panels comes from utilities, and so having a large plant allows for US solar manufacturers to import the cells from China, usually partnering with the companies that are sending them over, and then assembling them, and then either selling them as their own branded product or selling them under the Chinese manufacturer's name, which helps them escape tariffs. Tariffs are a very interesting point to make here, because prior to 2018, there were really no tariffs in place governing the import of Chinese or overseas panels. That meant that US panel manufacturers were largely pushed out of the industry. They just couldn't compete on China's pricing. So in 2018, tariffs were put in place to really prohibit foreign manufacturers from bringing in their panels and selling them for a very cheap price. Once those tariffs were in place, actually about 10 new US solar manufacturers were established, which just goes to show how important those tariffs were to allow allow domestic manufacturers to compete. Government incentives are also very important. These solar manufacturing plants are expensive, so help is appreciated. There are other strategies that U.S. solar manufacturer or assembler could take. From what we found, that's primarily differentiated products in a niche market. But after further analysis, we concluded that would be a very difficult strategy to successfully implement. So I'm going to pass it over to Will now, who will talk about strategy and implementation.
Thanks, Cam. So I think the first thing we have to consider is whether Minneapolis is, in fact, a competitive place to conduct manufacturing. And there's definitely pros and cons, I think, to Minneapolis as a location. On the pros side, we absolutely believe that there is, of course, a large and growing market for solar panels and for US manufactured solar panels, in particular in the Midwest. Additionally, though, on the workforce side of things, we think we're strong there for some reasons that I'll talk a little bit more about later in the presentation. However, we do need to recognize that there are definitely cons to Minneapolis as a location. The city does have higher fixed and variable costs relative to other Midwest locations. And in particular, if you were to compare, say, to like rural locations, that difference is significant. So the first scenario we'd like to propose is attracting a large international manufacturer. So for the reasons we've described regarding the high tariff barriers, there are many foreign manufacturers that are starting to realize that there's significant benefit to establishing a US assembly operation. And if you look at the top 10 solar panel manufacturers in the world, right now only 3 of those, in fact, have a US assembly plant. So we think there's some significant upside there. In terms of the target market that we think would be the most impactful, it would probably be Midwest utilities, because again, we think there is an underservice from a regional and local standpoint on production there. The scale numbers we have here are ones that we put together based on some financial and demand analysis that we conducted, and the notes on that are deeper in our appendix of the presentation. And this scenario that we're talking about here would create approximately 500 direct jobs. And so the second scenario we'd like to consider is partnering with a regional solar panel installer. So basically what this would mean would be taking an existing Minneapolis or Twin Cities Metro solar installation company and helping them backward integrate into solar panel manufacturing. And one might ask, why would a company want to enter what seems to be like a very different kind of operation? And the reason is that, first of all, there are significant efficiencies that can be found in terms of optimizing the solar panels that are being produced specifically for the system that's being installed. And we know this because many solar panel manufacturers have forward integrated into the solar panel installation business. And so what we'd be talking about here would be sort of the opposite, because there already is a significant and substantial solar panel installation industry in the Twin Cities. In terms of the scale of the operation, obviously, as you can see here, the numbers would be smaller, both in terms of jobs as well as square footage, but still significant and enough to make, I think, a real impact in Minneapolis. So I think one of the key takeaways we need to recognize is that for a large solar panel manufacturer, it really is a high risk, high reward sort of proposition. While there are obviously substantial benefits in terms of jobs and tax base creation, the reality is this is still an industry that's highly dependent on tariff support and government subsidies. And additionally, these are projects that can be located effectively anywhere within certain reasons. And because of that, these are projects that are very attractive to a wide variety of communities across the United States, and they're willing to compete for those. And often that comes in the form of large tax incentive packages. So there is a literal cost that comes to this, as well as an opportunity cost that can come with just the sheer amount of time being put into an operation that may either significantly weaken or even fail if the government subsidies are reduced. For the regional installation scenario that we proposed, that was effectively sort of almost a lower risk but lower reward scenario, where on the one hand, we think that there would be lower requirements for a project like this in terms of tax incentives and government support. And on the other hand, it would obviously create less jobs and economic impact. So in terms of the resources needed, we done some extensive research on the real estate requirements for a project like this. And when we did our assessment of potential facilities in North Minneapolis, we were not able to identify at this time a facility of the 250 to 300,000 square foot range. However, once we broadened our scope to include adjacent neighborhoods as well as neighborhoods that are easily accessed by public transportation for North Minneapolis residents, we found some good options in the Como and Midway neighborhoods. In terms of the size of the incentive packages we're talking about, based on the conversations that we've had with industry experts, both site selection consultants, as well as on the solar panel assembly project side, something in the range of about 10% of capital investments is pretty typical and quite frankly expected for projects like this. On the workforce side, we think we're good there. These are generally jobs that only require either unskilled or semi-skilled labor coming in and essentially provide all the on-the-job training that an entry-level solar panel assembly employee would need. And I think finally, it's really important to recognize that if this is an opportunity that North Minneapolis is interested in pursuing, they really need to engage as a community the potential customer base early on in the process and ensure that in fact there is the demand there to justify a project like this. So that would be talking with local large utilities like Xcel or other large utilities and industrial customers in the Midwest. So I think in terms of the key takeaways, is this a real opportunity, solar panel manufacturing? Yes, broadly speaking, in the US, there's tremendous growth in this area. Can we win? Can Minneapolis win in this area? Maybe. Again, this is an industry and an opportunity that's highly dependent on federal tariffs and subsidies. There are, again, other Midwest locations that offer lower costs, and it would require a substantial combination of both tax incentives, preparation, and quite frankly, luck in order to win a project like this. Now, and then finally, if we did win it, would it be worth it? Well, yes, absolutely. Based on the numbers that we have here, you can see that it really would make an impact for the community. So with that, Kate is going to talk about some of the adjacent opportunities in the solar industry.
Yes, thanks, Will. So a discussion of job creation in the solar industry in Minnesota would not be complete if we didn't spend a little bit of time on the solar installation piece. So if you look at it job for job, there are 8 jobs in solar installation for every 1 job in solar manufacturing. So as demand grows for solar panels in state, this is where we see significant job growth. Currently almost 3,000 solar installation jobs in the state of Minnesota, and the majority of that in Hennepin County. There are a couple other factors that make this an attractive opportunity for job creation. Unlike manufacturing, solar installation is something that by definition cannot be exported. The jobs have to be done locally. And in terms of career progression, there are many opportunities in solar installation for people to get on-the-job experience and grow their career to higher hourly wages through certification without requiring a 2 or 4-year college degree. So on the face of this, it seems like something that should absolutely be pursued. Unfortunately, the struggles in making this an opportunity for North Minneapolis have nothing to do with the market and everything to do with political and racial barriers. Because solar installation is classified as electrical work by the state, that means that certification pathways are channeled through the unions, and there are just a number of historical and political factors that are making it hard for Black Minnesotans to get those union jobs and take advantage of that pipeline. So in terms of strategies to move forward, that being the case, one would be looking and investing a lot of political capital into large-scale policy reform. So making sure that there are training centers in the Twin Cities Metro that people have access to, creating policy incentives for hiring locally. Because what we see right now is that a large number of solar installations are being done by electricians who are actually coming from out of state to meet this demand, because there are not enough certified electricians in the state of Minnesota to do them. The last thing to look at would be to follow the example of other states who have created more tiers of certification to allow more entry-level participation in basic solar install under the supervision of a licensed electrician. If that bucket is not viable, then the next best thing would be to create pipelines to these jobs, possibly partnering with local installation companies. That would be finding owners who are committed to hiring locally, and then connecting those owners to the state funds, federal funds, private funds that will offset those training costs and certification costs for their staff members. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to Cam, who's going to wrap up for us.
Yes, thank you, Kate. So wrapping things up, we thought it'd be helpful to compare modular with solar manufacturing and installation. You can see the numbers here, but really the key takeaway is that solar opportunities are would mean direct jobs and an economic impact orders of magnitude larger than modular housing, and also the feasibility is higher. And what this leads to is our recommendation that that the NJCT should not pursue modular housing. So we are very excited about the potential that solar assembly and possibly solar installation could have, and the next steps would be for solar assembly at least to really ensure that that we can get letters of interest from the utilities and also sufficient government subsidies. Solar installation is another very exciting proposition. More research needs to be done on whether a solar installation firm created by the NJCT could overcome the racial and political barriers that Kate outlined. But again, a very exciting opportunity. So that wraps up our presentation. We know that you may have some questions for us, and this being a recording, we can't directly interact with you. So if you would be willing, please send James DeSoto any of your questions via email, and we will we'll make sure to take a look at those and talk as a team and get back to you with our answers. So thank you on behalf of my team, and we will look forward to hearing from you.